Alexandra Grant opens up about a quiet date night with Keanu Reeves, where small gestures, like shared laughter, hand-holding, and unhurried conversation, meant more than any red carpet moment. She reveals how their evening was filled with warmth, support, and inside jokes, showing a relationship built on deep trust and genuine companionship. The evening began with a kind of silence that felt heavier than usual. In her studio, Alexandra stood in front of a half-finished canvas, still holding the brush she'd been pretending to use for the last 10 minutes. The colors in front of her, deep reds, soft golds, a streak of midnight blue, were supposed to be about joy, about finding light later in life. But her hand wouldn't move. Her phone, face down on a small table, kept pulling at her attention like a magnet. She already knew what it would say if she picked it up. His short, gentle message, the one that had both comforted and unsettled her all day. "Dinner tonight? Just us. No rush. There's something I'd like to talk about." She closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. Most people thought she'd be used to attention by now. The interviews, the questions, the whispers about their age difference, the headlines that turned their private life into spectacle. What they didn't see was the quiet cost of it, the tiny doubts that built up over time. Was she enough? Was she too serious, too private, too different from the polished image the world wanted next to him? Alexandra had always been strong, the kind of woman who built her own path, but some days resilience felt like a weight she had to lift over and over again. Tonight, for reasons she couldn't fully name, that weight felt heavier. She walked to the small mirror hanging near the door and studied her reflection. Silver hair pulled softly back, no heavy makeup, just the face she'd earned through years of work and heartbreak and tenderness. She chose the red dress because she knew he liked the way the color lit up her eyes, but even as she smoothed the fabric over her waist, a part of her wondered if she should have tried harder, looked younger, done more. The thought annoyed her. That wasn't who she wanted to be. She believed in honesty, in art, in love, in the way a body tells its own story. Still, as the minutes ticked closer to their reservation, insecurity curled quietly at the edges of her resolve. By the time she stepped out onto the sidewalk, Los Angeles was glowing in that in-between way it did after sunset, streets not yet crowded, the sky still holding a trace of soft blue. She walked toward the car slowly, letting the cool air settle her nerves. When she saw him leaning against the car door, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched as if he was trying to take up less space, she felt the first warmth of the night rise in her chest. He looked up, saw her, and his whole expression changed. It was never a dramatic reaction. No movie star performance, no exaggerated compliment. But his eyes softened in that unmistakable way, like he was genuinely surprised that the world could offer him something this gentle. "You look like you," he said with a half-smile, stepping forward to open the door for her. "My favorite version." She laughed, but his words landed deeper than he knew. That was what he did without trying. He pulled her back toward herself when her thoughts drifted too far into doubt. Still, as she slipped into the seat and he walked around to the driver's side, she couldn't shake the small tremor of unease beneath the comfort. He had sounded different in his message. Calmer, but also more serious. It wasn't fear of losing him. She trusted him with a certainty that surprised even her sometimes. It was something else, a sense that tonight would not just be another quiet dinner, another safe harbor from the noise of the world. They drove mostly in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. The city glided past their windows in golden streaks of light, and every so often he would reach over and briefly squeeze her hand, like a wordless reminder that he was there. Alexandra watched the way he focused on the road, the small lines at the corner of his eyes, the mix of gentleness and weariness he carried. Fame had not hardened him, but it had weighed on him. She'd seen him come home drained, not from long hours on set, but from the bright, invasive attention that treated him as an idea instead of a person. And yet, even on those days, he still asked her about her art, still listened, still cared. That was the quiet courage she respected in him, the choice to stay kind even when the world was. "Big day in the studio?" he asked, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, careful, as if he already knew she had been wrestling with more than paint and brushes. "Big day in my head," she admitted, looking out the window. "I was painting joy and ended up arguing with myself instead." He laughed low and warm. "Well, at least you picked a worthy opponent." Then more gently, "You want to tell me about it?" She hesitated. This was the part she still found strangely hard, even with him. letting someone see the soft underbelly of her doubts. She was the woman who encouraged others, the friend who always believed in second chances, the artist who told students to stay true to their vision even when the world didn't understand. Admitting that she, too, got tangled in fear sometimes felt like breaking a promise she'd made to herself. But she had also promised something else, to be honest with him, even when it wasn't pretty. "I just wondered today if I'm asking too much," she said slowly. "To have a private life and a public relationship, to be with you and still not want to perform for everyone. Sometimes I feel guilty that you carry the spotlight and I keep pulling us back into the shadows." He was quiet for a moment, letting her words settle instead of rushing to fix them. That was another thing she cherished. He never treated her feelings like a problem to be solved. Finally, he nodded to himself and said, "You know, the shadows are where the stars show up, right?" His lips curved into a small, almost shy smile. "I like the shadows with you. That's where the real stuff happens." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She turned to look at him and saw that he wasn't offering a line. He meant every word. There was a humility in the way he spoke that made it impossible to doubt him. He had built a life on giant screens, yet seemed most at peace in simple, unseen moments. Not because he was pretending to be humble, but because something in him truly believed that the quiet parts of life mattered more. It was exactly what she loved about him, and somehow what made her feel the most vulnerable. They pulled up in front of the small restaurant, the kind of place you could miss if you weren't looking for it. No red carpet, no velvet rope, just soft light spilling from the windows and a single vase of flowers on a small wooden table by the door. He parked a little farther down the street, away from the main entrance, a silent gesture she recognized. His way of protecting their peace, of making it just a little harder for cameras to find them. As they got out of the car, he placed a gentle hand on the small of her back, guiding her across the sidewalk. The touch was light, but it steadied her more than she wanted to admit. Halfway to the door, he stopped walking. Alexandra turned, slightly confused, and saw an expression on his face she couldn't immediately read. There was affection there, yes, but also a nervousness she rarely saw in him, a flicker of uncertainty that made her own heart start to race. The sounds of the street dimmed around them, the distant rush of cars, the low murmur of conversations drifting from the restaurant. Everything felt suddenly far away. "Alex," he said quietly, searching her eyes as if he was trying to find the right words inside them before speaking. "Before we go in, there's something I need to talk to you about tonight. It's important, and once I say it, we can't really go back to how things were before." For a moment, neither of them moved. The door to the restaurant opened, spilling warm light onto the sidewalk, and a couple squeezed past them, laughing, oblivious. Alexandra felt her pulse beating in her throat, caught between curiosity and a sharp, unexpected fear. She didn't know yet whether what he was about to say would heal an old wound in her or open a new one. The question he was afraid to ask. Inside the restaurant, the light was soft enough to make everything look gentler than it really was. Candles flickered on each table, and the quiet clink of cutlery blended with low music that sounded like it was coming from another decade. The host recognized them but didn't make a scene, only gave a small nod and led them to a table in the corner, half hidden behind a tall plant and a wooden screen. It was the kind of place that respected privacy, and that was why they kept coming back. Tonight, though, the intimacy of the corner felt almost too close, like there was nowhere for her eyes or her worries to escape. They settled into their seats, and for a while they let the simple rituals of dinner distract them. Menus opened and closed, a shared smile over the wine list, a quiet debate about whether to order dessert first just because they could. On the surface, it was familiar, even comforting. But Alexandra could feel it, the space between his words, the way his fingers tapped once against the edge of his glass and then stilled, as if he was catching himself. The calm he carried tonight wasn't the easy calm she loved. It felt like the calm that comes right before a wave breaks. She watched him as he finally put his menu down, his eyes lifting to meet hers. There was kindness there, the softness that had drawn her to him in the first place, but it was layered with something heavier. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped when the waiter appeared at their table. They ordered almost automatically, old favorites chosen by memory. By the time the waiter walked away, the unsaid words between them felt louder than the indistinct conversations around them. "Alex," he began, his voice lower now, the way it got when he was about to say something that mattered. Do you ever feel like I've dragged you into a storm you didn't ask for? The question took her off guard. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? He reached for his glass but didn't drink, just turned it gently between his fingers. Your life was yours, your art, your pace, your privacy, and then I walked in with all of this. He gestured vaguely, not toward the restaurant but toward something invisible that seemed to hover around him. The cameras, the headlines, the strangers who felt entitled to a piece of him. Some days I see your name in places it doesn't belong, on screens, in stories that have nothing to do with who you are. And I wonder if the kindest thing I could have done would have been to keep you far away from me. Anger rose in her chest, not at him, but at the world that had made him think this way. You didn't drag me anywhere, she said quietly. I walked in with my eyes open. I chose you. He gave a small, sad smile. I know you did. You're braver than you think. He paused, and his next words came slower. But bravery shouldn't have to be your price of admission to love me. Their food arrived, but neither of them reached for it. Alexandra watched him, trying to read the tiny shifts in his expression. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. She had prepared herself for talk of travel, of long shoots in distant countries, of time apart. She could handle that. She had built a life around absence and return. But this sounded like something deeper, something that might not be fixed by time or patience. He leaned back slightly, exhaling as if he had been holding that breath all day. A few days ago, he said, someone sent me a link to an article. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. It tore into you, not me. You, your work, your age, your hair, your clothes. It tried to turn your existence into a punchline because you don't fit some fantasy people think they're owed. His jaw tightened just enough for her to notice. And the worst part is the article only exists because of me. Because you happen to love someone the world won't look away from. She felt a cold wave move through her. She had seen the comments, the jokes, the casual cruelty dressed up as opinion. She had become good at pretending they didn't sting. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing the shame in his voice for something that wasn't his fault, opened a crack in her composure. I've been in this industry a long time, he went on, eyes steady on hers. I've lost people. I've seen how fragile happiness is. I promised myself that if I ever got a second chance at something real, I would protect it, even if it cost me. And now I look at you, walking through this fire you never wanted, and I keep asking myself if I've kept that promise or broken it. Silence settled between them. She wanted to reach across the table, to tell him he was enough, that they were stronger than strangers' opinions, that this was their life, not the world's. But before she could speak, he took a breath that sounded almost like surrender. I've been thinking about something, he said, every word heavy. And I need you to hear this knowing that it comes from love, not from doubt. He swallowed, eyes dark with a sadness that scared her more than anger ever could. I think the kindest thing I might be able to do for you is to let you go. The breaking point. For a second, she wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. The restaurant faded, chairs, candles, the low music, all of it dropping away until there was only that one sentence echoing inside her. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came, the small, crooked smile that would tell her this was some kind of dark joke. But his face stayed open and painfully sincere, eyes brimming with a kind of regret that made her chest tighten. Let me go, she repeated, the words barely making it past her lips. You think that would be kind? He winced at the hurt in her voice but didn't look away. I think it would be selfless, he said softly. You could go back to being known for your work alone. No more strangers dissecting your face, your history, your choices. No more walking into a gallery and wondering who's there for the art and who's there because they recognize the person standing beside you. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was anger so sharp it surprised her. So your solution to other people's cruelty is to punish me with your absence? She asked, her voice steady but shaking underneath. To walk away so they can say they were right all along, that I was just a temporary headline, a phase you grew out of. His shoulders folded in a little, as if he was trying to make himself smaller in front of her pain. That's not what I want, he said. I want to wake up next to you when we're old and everything hurts and we're still laughing at dumb jokes. I want to read your books and see your new pieces and watch you take over rooms without trying to. But I also can't stand the thought that being with me is costing you something you can never get back, your sense of safety in your own life. She pressed her fingers against the edge of the table to stop them from trembling. Part of her wanted to shout, to demand how he could decide this for both of them, to remind him that she was not fragile glass. But another part of her, quieter, more dangerous, understood the twisted love behind his words. He was trying to protect her in the only way he knew how, by stepping between her and the fire, even if it meant walking away from the warmth they had built together. "You don't get to erase me from your life and call it a gift," she said, her voice lower now. "You don't get to turn us into a tragic little story about sacrifice. I chose this. I knew what your name meant in the world. I knew it would bring noise. I chose it anyway." "And I chose you," he answered quickly. "Every day, but my choices leak into your life in ways you never consented to. You didn't choose to have your childhood photos stolen and mocked. You didn't choose to have strangers speculate about your grief like it's entertainment. Sometimes I wake up and think, if she weren't with me, that article wouldn't exist. Those comments wouldn't exist. That pain wouldn't exist. How am I supposed to live with that and call myself kind?" The word grief landed between them like a small, heavy stone. Her mind flicked through memories, the quiet way he spoke about people he had lost, the names he rarely said out loud, the way he carried love and absence in the same heartbeat. She knew his history, the world knew parts of it too. But there were depths only she had seen, the guilt he still carried for things that had never been his fault. Tonight, that old guilt had simply found a new shape, her. She felt something inside her crack, not in a way that broke her, but in a way that opened her. "Do you really think," she asked slowly, "that the hardest parts of my life began with you?" He blinked, thrown off. "What do you mean?" "I had people explain my worth to me long before the internet ever saw my face," she said. "I had professors tell me my work was too strange, too quiet, too ambitious. I had partners who loved the idea of a strong woman until they realized it meant I had a life and voice of my own. I learned to stand in rooms that wanted to shrink me. You weren't the first storm, Keanu. You were the first shelter." The words hung in the air, trembling and true. For the first time that evening, his eyes glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like he was afraid anything he said would make it worse. "But if being with me has turned your shelter into a target," he began. She cut him off, not unkindly. "Then we don't burn it down," she said. "We reinforce it. We decide what gets in and what doesn't. We choose the terms of our own life." She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "You think walking away would be brave. I think staying and learning how to live with all of this without letting it poison us is braver." He stared at her, and for a moment she saw something shift behind his eyes. Hope battling with fear, love pushing against old patterns of self-blame. The room seemed to fade back in around them, but now the air felt charged, as if the outcome of this night would redraw the lines of both their lives. "Alex," he whispered, the word more prayer than name, "what if I'm not strong enough to keep you from getting hurt?" She held his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper but steady as stone. "Then maybe it's my turn to be the strong one for both of us." He didn't answer right away. His hand moved across the table, stopping just short of hers, hovering as if there was an invisible line he was afraid to cross. When he finally spoke, his voice held a new kind of tremor. There's something else I need to show you," he said, patting his jacket pocket with fingers that weren't quite steady. "Because I didn't just come here tonight to tell you I could let you go. I came here to ask you if you're willing to hold on to me even tighter, no matter what comes next." What he carried in his pocket. He pulled a small, worn notebook from his pocket, the kind artists carried, the kind she herself filled with ideas and fragments of color. Its edges were softened, the cover bent at one corner like it had lived in his jacket for months. He laid it on the table between them without opening it, as if just placing it there was already a confession. Alexandra looked at it, then at him. "What is that?" she asked softly. He let out a slow breath. "My version of courage," he said, "or maybe my way of trying to deserve you." She reached forward and with a care that surprised even her, flipped it open. The first page held a sketch, simple lines, not polished but tender. It was of her hands, fingers stained with paint, a mug of coffee beside them. Beneath it, in his slightly messy handwriting, were 3 words, "The day we met." Her heart squeezed. She turned the page. Another sketch, the two of them on a bench drawn from memory, their faces not quite defined but their posture unmistakable, leaning in, sharing some quiet joke. Below it, she laughs like she trusts me. Page after page, she found their life translated into charcoal and ink. Her reading in bed with her glasses sliding down her nose. Him watching her install a piece in a gallery, standing back in the crowd so he wouldn't draw attention. Their hands, always their hands, reaching for each other in cars, in corridors, under tables, at crowded events. In the margins, he had written small notes that read more like prayers than descriptions. How did I get this lucky? Don't mess this up. Protect her. Even from me. Her vision blurred for a moment and she blinked hard. You've been drawing us, she whispered. He nodded, cheeks coloring slightly. I'm not you, he said. I can't build whole worlds with color and language, but I needed some way to hold onto the real version of us, the one that doesn't fit in a headline. So I started carrying this. It reminded me that behind every noise, every camera, there is this quiet thing we built that nobody gets to define but us. She turned to the final page. There the sketch was more hesitant, as if he had redrawn it many times. It was of them at a table, this table, her in the red dress, him in the black jacket. Their hands joined in the center, and under the drawing, instead of a note, there was a single question written in small letters. Will you build a life with me out loud? Her breath caught. She looked up, and he was already watching her, his own fear naked now. I know I scared you, he said quietly. Talking about letting you go, it scared me too, but I had to be honest about where my head has been. I've been afraid that loving me in the open is too much to ask of anyone, afraid that the price of stepping into the light together would be your peace. But then I thought maybe the answer isn't to hide. Maybe it's to decide what that light is used for. He leaned in, elbows resting on the table, his voice gaining steadiness as he spoke from that place in himself that rarely came out, the one made of conviction rather than doubt. People are watching anyway. They're going to write what they want. We can spend our lives running from that, or we can turn it into something useful. We could build something together, projects, foundations, spaces where other people who feel invisible can be seen with kindness instead of cruelty. We could take all this attention I never asked for and give it away to people who need it more. The idea hit her not like a sharp shock, but like a slow, spreading warmth. She had always believed art should be in service to something bigger than ego. He had always believed that the work only mattered if it left the world a little softer. Their values had aligned long before their hands ever did. To hear him suggest turning their relationship, so often treated like gossip, into a force for quiet good made something inside her sit up and listen. You want to share us, she said, testing the words, but on our own terms, not as a spectacle, as an example. Not a perfect one, he said quickly. We'll make mistakes. We'll mess up interviews and say the wrong thing and probably overshare or undershare. But we can be honest. We can show that love doesn't have an age limit, that grief can survive alongside joy, that two people can stand in the middle of a storm and still choose to be gentle. We can use my loud life to amplify your quiet work, if you want that. Only if you want that. For a long moment, Alexandra didn't speak. Her mind held two images at once. Herself retreating back into the safety of anonymity, and herself standing beside him, not as an accessory, but as a partner in something braver than either of them alone. She thought of the students she mentored, the ones who felt too strange, too old, too different to be seen. She thought of how it would have changed her younger self to see someone like her, silver-haired and unapologetic, loved in broad daylight. She realized then that she had been asking life for a quiet corner, when maybe what she was being offered was a small, shared stage, with the chance to redefine what standing there meant. You're asking me, she said slowly, to stop apologizing for being seen next to you and to start using it. Yes, he answered, the word almost a sigh of relief. I'm asking if you'll stay, not hidden, not sacrificed, just with me, fully, even when it's complicated. Her fingers moved across the table, closing the last inch between them. She placed her hand on top of his, her touch firm, her voice clear. I'm not leaving, she said. Not because you're afraid and not because strangers are loud. We can be afraid and stay. We can be hurt and still move forward. That's what resilience is, isn't it? His hand tightened around hers, and for the first time that night she saw the tension in his shoulders ease, just a fraction. The waiter appeared, almost apologetic, to ask if everything was all right. They both laughed softly at the timing, and Alexandra realized her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. Everything's getting there, she answered, exchanging a quick glance with him that said more than words could. They ate then not to fill the silence, but to ground themselves back in the ordinary, bites of pasta, shared bread. A stolen forkful from his plate she claimed was just for research. The air between them had changed, grief and fear still present but no longer driving the night. Eventually the plates were cleared away, the candles burned lower, and the restaurant began to empty. When they stepped outside, the night had deepened. A small group of people stood across the street, phones in hand. Someone's whisper turned into a murmur as the door closed behind them. Alexandra felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the reflex to drop her gaze, to move quickly and quietly past. Beside her, she felt him tense, waiting to follow whatever lead she gave. For the first time, instead of shrinking, she took a breath and lifted her head. She reached for his hand, not hiding the movement, not rushing it, simply taking it like it was the most natural thing in the world. The flash of one camera burst across the street, capturing the moment she chose to stop flinching, and the moment he let her step forward first. "Ready," he murmured. "No," she said honestly, squeezing his fingers, "but let's go anyway." And as they started walking toward the parked car, a stranger called out something she couldn't quite hear. But this time, she didn't turn away. She looked straight ahead, aware that tonight would follow them into headlines and commentary and speculation. What she didn't yet know was that something even more unexpected was waiting for them before the night was over, something that would turn this decision into the sweetest, clearest memory she'd ever carry. The sweetest moment almost no one saw. The drive after dinner should have been simple, 15 minutes back to familiar streets, to the quiet safety of home. Instead, he took a turn she didn't recognize, then another, the city shifting from bright storefronts to softer residential blocks. Alexandra glanced over, curious, but there was a small, almost boyish smile on his face that told her not to worry. "Are we lost?" she asked. "Not unless the GPS in my head is broken," he replied. "There's one more stop I want to make tonight, if you're still talking to me, that is." She gave him a look that was half amusement, half warning. "You don't get to almost break up with me and then act charming like nothing happened." He winced playfully. "Fair, terrible timing on my part, but for what it's worth, I didn't come here planning to let you go. I came planning to ask you to leap with me. I just got tangled in my fear on the way." The car slowed, then finally stopped at the edge of a small park she recognized from old memories of childhood visits to the city. A simple place with a line of trees, a worn walking path, and a low hill that caught starlight when the sky cooperated. It was late enough now that the park was almost empty, just a few distant figures and the soft hum of the city held at arm's length. They stepped out of the car, and the night air wrapped around them, cooler here, tinged with the smell of grass and distant jasmine. Without explaining, he started walking toward the hill, their footsteps soft on the path. After a few moments, he stopped and glanced back at her. "Did you ever imagine," he asked, "when you were younger, what your life would look like at this age?" She thought about it. "Honestly, I just hoped I'd still be making things, that I'd still be curious. I didn't think much about who would be beside me." She smiled faintly. "I assumed if love hadn't showed up by a certain age, it had just passed me by, like a train that didn't see me on the platform." He nodded, his expression distant for a heartbeat. "I thought something similar, not that it had passed me by exactly, more that I had used up my share." He paused, the weight of that admission settling between them. "And then there you were, talking about color like it was a second language, not looking impressed by my life, just interested in my mind. I didn't know what to do with that." They reached the top of the hill. The city was a scattered constellation below them, buildings blinking in quiet competition with the stars overhead. He turned to face her fully now, the breeze brushing his hair back from his forehead. "I brought you here," he said, "because this is where I came the night before I told you I loved you." Her breath hitched. "You never told me that." "I know." He glanced at the ground, then back at her with a small, sheepish grin. "I sat right over there on that ridiculous bench with the chipped paint and tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself I'd ruin your life, or that it would ruin mine, or that it would ruin this strange, beautiful friendship we had. But the more I argued with myself, the clearer one thing became. Not telling you would be a bigger act of cowardice than anything I could do after." He took a step closer. Tonight felt like that night all over again. Different fears, same choice. Stay small or tell you the truth and trust you with it. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. And what's the truth tonight? He looked straight at her, no deflection, no joke ready as an escape route. The truth is that I don't just want to love you privately in the quiet corners where it's safe. I want to build something with you. I want our lives so entangled that my work, your art, our causes, our mournings, our griefs, all of it, are part of one story. Not because I want to own you, because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have your fingerprints on it. She swallowed hard. The night seemed to lean in closer to listen. You're talking about more than a foundation, she said carefully. I'm talking about a life, he replied. Not a perfect one, not a glossy one. A stubborn, resilient, deeply ordinary life we fight to protect together. He hesitated, then added, voice rougher now, if marriage is a word that matters to you, then yes, I'm talking about that too. If it isn't, then I'm talking about a commitment that doesn't need paper to make it real, but that we both treat as sacred. He reached into his pocket again, and for a split second her heart stumbled, bracing for the small box she had seen in movies 1,000 times. But instead, he pulled out a simple silver ring attached to a thin chain, worn, a little scratched, clearly not new. This was my father S., he said quietly. I've carried it for years as a reminder of everything complicated about love, how it can fail, how it can wound, how it can still mean something even when people don't know how to hold it. I always thought I'd keep it to myself. A relic, not a promise. He took her hand and placed the ring in her palm, the metal cool against her skin. I'd like to rewrite what this means, he said. I don't know what the future looks like. I can't promise the world will ever be gentle with us. But I can promise I will keep choosing you, even when it's hard, even when I'm scared, even when my first instinct is to run from the ways I might hurt you. I'm asking if you'll choose me back, not just when the world isn't watching, but when it is. Tears slipped down her face before she could stop them, quiet and unashamed. She looked at the ring, at his open, vulnerable face, at the city that had tried to turn their story into something small and shallow. Then she thought of the students who would one day watch this on a screen, the strangers who would hear her words in an interview, the people who had been told again and again that their time for love or courage had passed. Yes, she said, the words steady and full. I choose you. I choose this, not because it's easy, but because it's real, and because I'm tired of pretending that being seen with you is some kind of crime I have to apologize for. She slipped the chain over her head, the ring resting just below her collarbone, a quiet weight that felt like both history and beginning. He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, relief, and awe tangled together. I didn't bring a speech, she added, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. But I can tell you this, if we're going to do this, really do this, then we're going to be kind to ourselves in the process. No more blaming yourself for the world's cruelty. No more trying to love me by disappearing. You don't get to protect me by leaving. You protect me by staying. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, holding her with a tenderness that made the whole night fall into place. It wasn't fireworks or grand orchestras. It was the steady beat of his heart under her ear, the warmth of his jacket, the soft sound of his breath when he whispered, "Okay, I'll stay, as long as you'll have me." They stood like that for a long time, the city humming below, the stars indifferent but present. And somewhere in that stillness, Alexandra understood that this was the real sweetness of the night. Not the restaurant, not the ring, not even the promise of a shared future, but the simple, fragile courage of two people deciding to keep showing up for each other, again and again, in a world that wouldn't always make it easy. What she didn't know yet was how this night, this quiet hill, and that worn silver ring would become the core of a story she would one day tell millions of strangers. Not as a fairy tale, but as a roadmap for how to love without disappearing. The story she would one day tell. Months later, when Alexandra finally agreed to sit down for a long interview, the producers expected the usual. A polite artist, kind anecdotes, a few vague compliments about her partner. They had their questions ready, neat, and predictable, designed for gentle headlines. But as the cameras rolled and the lights warmed her face, she surprised them and herself by going back to that night. Not to the headlines that followed, not to the photos of them holding hands outside the restaurant, but to the small, almost invisible choices in between. She described standing at the edge of the sidewalk, hearing him say that once he spoke, they couldn't go back. She talked about the tiny betrayals of confidence she had learned to live with long before fame touched her life, how the loudest voices sometimes came from inside her own head. She spoke about his fear of hurting her, born from old wounds and repeated losses, and how kindness in his mind had become tangled with sacrifice. As she spoke, her tone was not bitter, but reflective. A woman who had walked through fire and was now more interested in what she had learned than in who had lit the match. The sweetest moments, she said, choosing her words carefully, were not the ones people would expect. It wasn't the dinner or the cameras or even the ring. It was the moment he told me he was afraid he didn't deserve a second chance at love. That broke my heart, not because I believed it, but because I recognized it. I'd felt that way too, in a different voice. The interviewer leaned forward, genuinely curious now. What changed? Alexandra smiled, the memory softening her features. We both stopped trying to protect each other by disappearing, she said. He thought the noble thing would be to let me go, to step away from my life so I wouldn't get burned by his. I thought the noble thing was to stay quiet, to take the hits, to pretend it didn't hurt when people reduced me to a headline. We were both carrying this idea that love had to be earned through suffering. That night on that hill, we decided to try something different. She told them about the notebook of sketches, the small, private act of devotion that no one was ever meant to see. She described the ring on the chain, how it had once represented a complicated past and now lay against her skin as a symbol of their shared choice to rewrite the meaning of love in their lives. She spoke about their plan to use the attention neither of them had asked for, to amplify quiet voices, to support overlooked artists, to remind people that tenderness is not a weakness but a discipline. Courage isn't always loud, she said. Sometimes it looks like staying when it would be easier to run. Sometimes it's checking in with yourself and asking, am I disappearing right now, or am I here fully even if I'm scared? That night, I chose to show up for my own life in a way I hadn't before, and he did the same. Clips from that interview would later be shared millions of times. People would quote her lines about second chances, about late-blooming love, about refusing to apologize for being visible. Viewers who had never heard her name before would write comments about how her words made them feel less alone in their own strange, imperfect stories. Some would say they cried without fully knowing why. Others would say they finally believed, just a little, that it wasn't too late for them to find something real. But on the night itself, long before any of that, the story was still beautifully small. It was just two people driving home from a hill where they had decided to stop hiding from the life that wanted to grow between them. In the car, the air was quiet in the best way, no heavy silences, just the kind that let a person breathe. He kept glancing over at her as if to check that she was still there, still real, still choosing him. Every time she met his eyes and smiled, and he relaxed a little more. At a red light, he reached over and brushed his fingers lightly against the ring hanging at her chest. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Strange," she admitted, "like I'm carrying both of our histories in one place." She paused, then added, "But also right, like it found the home it was waiting for." He nodded, eyes on the road again, and she could see the quiet relief in the curve of his mouth. There were no grand declarations after that, no perfect soundtrack swelling in the background. Just the rustle of the city at the edges of their path, the low hum of the engine, the simple rhythm of two people breathing in the same space, moving toward a future they hadn't yet defined but had chosen to face together. Years later, whenever she thought of the sweetest moments of that night, it wasn't the kiss under the streetlight she remembered most, or the way he rested his forehead against hers in the hallway when they finally reached home. It was three things, small and precise. His hand shaking just slightly as he placed the notebook on the table, the way he listened when she told him she wasn't leaving, and the feeling of her own fingers closing around his on that sidewalk as cameras flashed, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. In the end, the date night that could have been an ending became something else. A quiet, determined beginning. A story of two people learning that kindness sometimes means staying instead of stepping aside. That courage can be as simple as telling the truth when it scares you, and that resilience isn't about never breaking, but about choosing, again and again, to repair. And as she finished telling it in that interview, looking straight into the camera, her voice steady and warm, She said one last thing that lingered long after the screen went dark. "If you're lucky," Alexandra Grant said, "you meet someone who sees you as you are and still asks, 'Will you build a life with me?' out loud." The real miracle isn't that they ask. It's that you find the courage to say yes, and then you keep saying yes every ordinary day after.